Liam Williams has called out Chris Eubank Jr. He's actually been calling him out for a while now, but the latest occasion was in this IFL video from a couple days ago. And he says that Eubank Jr. ain't nothing, that he isn't really a good fighter and so on. I'm not going to use the language that he used. As you can see, it got X'd out, bleeped out by IFL in their title. Now, it's all well and good, Liam Williams calling out Eubank Jr. and saying he can beat him. And Liam Williams has looked very impressive over the past couple years since he moved up to middleweight. But if we're looking at this dispassionately, if we're looking at this objectively, we have to look at the opposition that both guys have been facing when we assess who we think would win the fight. We also have to look at the styles of both men. Now, Liam Williams, yes, he's been blasting people out, been looking very good against Andrew Robertson, Atlantes Fox, who went the distance with Demetrius Andrade. However, other than Liam Smith, who has Liam Williams really fought that's of any note? And the answer is nobody. Atlantes Fox, and how good is Atlantes Fox? We don't know. But other than Atlantes Fox, there's literally no one. Well, let me not discount Ty and Booth, who he did have a technical draw with early on in his career, 2013, but that was a very long time ago. Other than that, there's nobody on there. But when we go over to Eubank Jr.'s record, he's mixed in much better company. He beat James DeGale in his last fight, albeit a faded DeGale, still a much better name and obviously a higher weight division than Liam Williams has been fighting at. So James DeGale, George Groves, of course he lost that fight, but it was in a very prestigious tournament, and George Groves was a world champion at the time, so he mixed it in there. Again, a weight division above where Liam Williams is fighting. Avni Yildirim. Now, I'm not saying Yildirim is the greatest fighter, but if you look at his career subsequent to the Chris Eubank Jr. fight, he's not a complete mug, Avni Yildirim. He can fight a little bit. And Eubank Jr. was able to blast him out early with no problems at all. Arthur Abraham, former world champion. Yes, he was past his best at the time, but still, you compare it to Liam Williams' opponents, it's chalk and cheese. Who else we got in here? Dmitry Chudinov. Now, this is I think it's fair to say, lesser of the two brothers, but still, is there anybody on Liam Williams' record that he's beaten that's as good as Dmitry Chudinov? I think that's arguable. Okay? Again, Dmitry Chudinov picking up quite a few losses lately in his career. There's the loss to Eubank Jr. Definitely the lesser of the two brothers. But I would say a couple years ago, probably better than anybody Liam Williams has beaten. So, and of course, Billy Joe Saunders, before I forget, lest I forget. Billy Joe Saunders, that was a close fight back in 2014 between Eubank Jr. and Billy Joe Saunders. And even Eubank Jr.'s most recent fight against Korobov, that ended on a injury, okay? But still, Eubank Jr. has definitely been mixing at a much higher level than Liam Williams for the most part. Now, how will that translate into the fight? We also have to look into the styles of both men, as I mentioned earlier. And I've said this countless times on my channel. Eubank Jr. likes aggressive opponents. He likes guys who are going to come straight at him, like Avni Yildirim did, like Chudinov did. That's what he likes. I'm not saying that he's going to be successful against every single pressure fighter, but stylistically, that's what he prefers. He can walk them onto uppercuts and hooks, move around the perimeter of the ring, throw his combinations. He likes that kind of fight. And Liam Williams is going to give him that kind of fight. So, again, as much as I admire Liam Williams for calling Eubank Jr. out, and maybe it's the logical thing to do, especially from a financial point of view, because is Liam Williams really going to get a shot at Golovkin or any of the cash cows? Yeah, he's got this mandatory position against Andrade, but how much is that fight going to pay him? And I know it's not just all about money. You want to actually achieve something. You want to become a world champion. I get that. But it's also prize fighting. You do also want to get paid. And the only reason for Liam Williams to really be calling out Eubank Jr., I know he says he doesn't like him and he's no good and he wants to expose him. But realistically, the only reason that he'd be calling him out so much is because he can see the money in the fight. And he believes he can beat Eubank Jr. clearly. But there's a lot of money in that fight, or more money in that fight than there would be fighting a lot of other people for Liam Williams. And I guess he thinks if he can beat Eubank Jr., he puts himself on a pedestal. He becomes more of a name in the UK certainly, but to some degree in the world as well. So yeah, I get that. I'm not dissing Liam Williams for calling out Eubank Jr. at all. He's doing what he, I guess, needs to do. But I personally think Eubank Jr. would beat this guy. I know Liam Williams has really improved over the years, and I'm not even saying it would be an easy fight for Eubank Jr. necessarily, but stylistically, I do think he plays into Eubank Jr.'s hands. I think Eubank Jr. has been fighting at a much higher level. I think he's used to rough, tough guys who throw hard punches and what have you. And I don't see, unless Eubank Jr. has seriously regressed or something, I don't really see anything in Liam Williams that Eubank Jr. hasn't dealt with before. So you let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Chris Eubank Jr. versus Liam Williams. Do you think it can happen? And how would the fight go if it did happen? Maybe some of you guys would be picking Liam Williams, but again, Eubank Jr. tends to struggle against boxers, fighters who can keep him at long range, show him a jab, and get him to come forward at them. Because that's where Eubank Jr. isn't at his best. His footwork is not great when he's coming forward. He kind of trips over his feet. He's a little disorganized on the front foot. Bit ragged. But when he's got an opponent coming at him, it's a completely different story. So yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Come and join me on Patreon and access my weekly no-holds-barred, censorship-free podcast where we lift the lid on a wide range of controversial topics. It's not mainstream friendly, it's not politically correct, but that's the whole point. We dare to stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. Just head on over to my Patreon page and select the tier called Hatman Hot Topics. You'll gain access to a minimum of 2 hours of exclusive content every single week, including podcasts, videos, interviews, live stream Q&A sessions, as well as my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. Not to mention a vast back catalog of hundreds of hours of previous episodes. You can listen via the Patreon app with the option to download in high quality MP3. We've also got a Discord server where you can come and chat and hang out with myself and other members. There's no contract, no commitment, and you can cancel at any time. So come and join our community of free and critical thinkers by signing up with me here on Patreon today.